At First Credit Union Hotline to help us survive in Studio B is ESPN College Football insider, analyst, and expert Trevor Matich for another Matich Monday. Trevor, welcome back to the program. Help us figure out what the heck is going on with BYU football, would you?
Yeah, it's lots going on with BYU football. Some of it good, some of it not so good. The good, they need to build off. The bad, I'm not sure. Well, there's adjustments they can make to correct it. But I tell you, there's some real serious frustrations that had a spotlight shined on them once again in this loss.
Let's zone in on South Florida. What's the biggest reason or issue, in your opinion, as to why BYU was not able to beat a Bulls team that, quite frankly, they should have beaten?
They should have, and they would have beaten them going away if they were more effective on offense in the red zone. And this has been a problem with this team all year. When they would drive it down and come away either with no points or a field goal. I mean, I'm charting this game, and in the second quarter they had a 12-play drive that flamed out on the 5-yard line and kicked a field goal. They had a 14-play drive, flamed out on the 11-yard line, kicked a field goal. And then they drove down, missed a field goal. Then they drove down and on fourth down, twice at the end of the game, flamed out. So they were in scoring position a bunch of times and came away with no points. So really this game, had they done better in the red zone, would have been a completely different outcome. And the frustrating thing there is that they've got the tools. This offensive line and these running backs should be good enough to enforce their will down there against a team like South Florida. And with a guy like Matt Bushman, the passing game should have been able to be more effective and contribute as well. And that's a problem that the Redskins have got to solve. It's not the only team with that kind of problem. I mean, last year, Alabama had that problem. Different level of competition, but the same kind of problem where they would get down into the red zone. And they were one of the worst teams in the nation at running the ball by running backs when they got inside the 20, 25-yard line. And so they've been trying to fix that this year. They're still struggling with it. So the Cougars are not alone in that problem, but it is a huge problem right now.
Bigger issue right now, BYU on offense and its inability to run the ball and score points and get enough to win, or the defense, where BYU is the 8th worst rushing defense in the country, is allowing 3 sacks a game, and so on.
The problem with BYU's defense, I think, is more depth than anything else. And when the offense is not controlling the clock like they could, like they should, and when the offense is not putting points on the board and forcing the opposing offense to be one-dimensional, it means that those defenders, the starters, have to be out there for a longer period of time, more plays. Now, BYU in this game actually controlled the clock for 37 minutes. The problem is that they didn't get the points, and so they allowed USF to continue to invest in the running game, and USF ended up having 44 rushing attempts. That's a lot of rushing attempts, 243 yards. And so even though the Cougars' offense controlled the clock, they weren't able to make the Bulls one-dimensional and force them to have to throw the ball to come back, which they could have done had they been more effective on offense in the red zone, punching it in for touchdowns instead of coming away with either field goals or no points at all.
Yes.
So I would say that the Cougars' red zone offense is a big contributing factor to the defense struggling late in games with the rushing defense.
ESPN's Trevor Matich with us on BYU Sports Nation. I'm looking at the rest of the schedule, Trevor. Of course, number 14, Boise State coming to Provo this Saturday. After that, BYU has a bye. Then 3 games that the Cougars absolutely should win, but even fans are asking, well, what if BYU loses to Liberty? And can BYU beat Utah State? And can they beat San Diego State? Is BYU in real danger of not making a bowl game for the second time in 3 years?
They actually are. They need to get to 6 wins. They've got 2 right now. So if you stipulate wins against Liberty, Idaho State, and UMass, and none of those I would say are guaranteed. But if they stipulate that would bring them to 5 wins. Now they need to win one of home against Boise State, ranked 14th in the nation right now, or at Utah State, who played LSU tough for part of that game, for the part of the first half of that game. I mean, they stood toe-to-toe with LSU for a while before LSU's strength overcame them. And then to close the season at San Diego State. And it may come down to that game in San Diego that'll determine whether or not they go to a bowl game. And I'll tell you, they'll have to win those three that they're supposed to, but somehow they're going to have to win at least one of the others. And so there is danger that they might not.
Let's talk about Boise State for a second here. Hank Bachmeier had a hip pointer in the game. He could miss the game on Saturday. Jaron Hall looked like he might have got a concussion. Still waiting to hear what the situation is there, and if he did get one and if he can play, perhaps we might not know for a couple of days or until Saturday. And the game's going to be a little snowy, a little wet on a cold Saturday night. What do you think of the matchup with Boise State, a ranked team, a rival coming into Provo Saturday?
Well, the colder and snowier it gets, the more the line of scrimmage is important. And Boise State has the best combination, offensive and defensive lines, in the group of five, in my opinion. So this could end up just being a slugfest at the line. And on paper, BYU has got the ability to stand up in that kind of a fight. And this is where they'll really need to. That offensive line will need to play up to their potential. And the defensive line will need to show, the depth will need to show better than the depth has shown over the course of the season so far, because Boise State, especially if Bachmeier can't go, will turn this into a hit-you-in-the-mouth game. And BYU will have to stay in that fight for 4 full quarters. And so, again, I go back to the offense and the offensive line. They've got to not just control the clock. They've got to get points and touchdowns when they get to the red zone so that they can force Boise State into more predictable situations. And if they can't do that, then well, it'll be Mike Tyson against whoever BYU decides to be that day.
And hopefully it's someone good. Wait, Trevor, on paper, isn't this a bad matchup if it's in the trenches, since BYU's the 8th worst rushing defense and then bottom 25 in rushing offense right now?
Right, but the thing is, I look at the individual players and I like them. I mean, we'll see what the health situation of the offensive line was. There were a bunch of offensive linemen in that game against South Florida that were laying on the ground with a camera on them with trainers attending to them. So we'll see how their health is. But assuming health, you look at their guys individually, and they've got guys that are big, strong guys. And BYU always has been able to get that kind of offensive lineman. You look at the defensive line, you look at guys like Kairos Tonga and others that are just powerful dudes. Maybe not dynamic in terms of getting after the passer, but certainly tough to push off the ball in the running game. And so given that, you would think that the individual fights should be a relatively fair fight until it may get to the point to where one side or the other gets fatigued.
Trevor, we've talked about a lot of concerns and issues for BYU football and why they lost to Toledo and why they lost to USF, but how do you keep this team from becoming divisive and starting to doubt and to handle some trust issues that might develop between players and coaches? What's the key to shoring all of this up moving forward so that things don't go completely off the rails?
You know, I don't fear that they'll go off the rails, and I don't fear that they'll lose trust. I get the sense that this team truly loves one another and that they respect and love and trust their coaches. And why not? I mean, I believe in this coaching staff. Overall, this is a good bunch of coaches who know what they're doing, who have proven to the players that they love the players. And once the players know that, then you can do a lot of stuff in terms of getting these guys ready to play and pushing the players to their limits. The thing that this team really needs to do to turn it around is to be, especially on offense, more precise. They can't afford to lose plays. They can't afford to miss an open receiver and get behind the chains. They can't afford to be a little bit off on a block and have a run go for 1 yard instead of 3 and get behind the chains. Because ultimately, I think the biggest thing I see on tape is that the offense doesn't have that dynamic joystick player that can get the ball in his hands anywhere on the field, make the first guy miss, make the second guy miss, and run away from everybody else. You know, they've got guys that are fighting hard and doing well, but that dynamic human joystick hasn't revealed himself. And so what that means is, instead of being able to count on a guy like a KJ Hamler like Penn State has, you know, or you know, the whole receiving corps at Alabama or at Clemson. I mean, instead of having that guy, what they've got is the necessity of being very precise in game management, in staying even or ahead of the chains, because they really struggle when they're behind the chains because of that lack of dynamic feature, that dynamic presence. So ultimately, I think they know that. And I don't think they point fingers at each other because of that. It is what it is. But I think it's very important that they stay focused on what it means they need to do. And that means be more precise and execute better than the other side, because they don't have necessarily that presence to make up for a lack of execution on the previous play. So I don't see this as being the team pointing fingers at each other. I see it as the team really needs to bear down and understand who they are and how they can win, because they can win that way. They just can't afford the mistakes. They can't afford the lack of execution that we saw in the South Florida game, where they would get into scoring position and come away with either 3 or come away with nothing. And that's what they need to do. And I think they know that they're close to being a whole lot more effective than they've been in the last 2 weeks. They're really close. But close isn't good enough. And they've got a tough stretch of schedule coming up.
Let's talk about and wrap up with this. The top 4 is now Alabama. LSU climbs up 3 spots in the AP poll. Clemson and Ohio State. Is this just coming down to November 9th, Alabama and LSU at this point?
Well, it may. It may well, but Auburn's lurking in the weeds. I mean, Auburn went to Florida and lost, but they could still make the SEC championship game, and they could still make the playoff, and they get Alabama at home. They get Georgia at home as well, and they still have to play LSU. So Auburn's lurking in the weeds. But, yeah, I think right now the best team in the country, the best team, is Ohio State. But I think LSU is just right up there next to them. I think Ohio State's defense I trust more than LSU's defense, which is why I put the Buckeyes up above them. Clemson I wouldn't have in the top 4 right now. Alabama I would have at number 4. And so this is I would have Ohio State at number 1, LSU at number 2, Oklahoma number 3, and Alabama number 4, with Wisconsin and Penn State right there up against them. And Clemson, their offense did well against Florida State for the first time in a while, but I need to see some consistency out of that Clemson offense. Their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, after we saw him light up Alabama in the national championship game last year, came in with people calling him this year the greatest college quarterback since John Elway.
Whoa.
Well, maybe he's got the kind of talent to eventually get there, but it's unfair to put that kind of expectation that he's already a fully polished product on his shoulders. And what happened was defensive coordinators saw what he did well last year, and they sought to complicate that and make him go to plan B. And in the first month of the season, he struggled to get to plan B. Well, we'll see if this Florida State game is a breakout for him or just a bad Florida State defense. But either way, until that offense becomes more consistently effective, then I wouldn't put Clemson in the top 4.
Trevor, great to talk with you. We always appreciate the insight. Win or lose, rain or shine, always bring it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.